The chandeliers of Merivale House blazed with 1,000 candles, casting golden light across the polished marble floors, where London's elite gathered in their finest silks and jewels. The winter ball of Countess Merivale was always the event that reopened the season after the Christmas respite, and tonight the ballroom hummed with anticipation, gossip, and the sweet strains of a waltz that seemed to float through the air like perfume. Ladies fanned themselves behind painted ivory, their eyes sharp as they catalogued every entrance, every gown, every whispered scandal that might provide entertainment for the months ahead. Gentlemen stood in clusters near the windows, discussing politics and horses, while their gazes wandered toward the dance floor where young ladies twirled in their fathers' approved arms. But beneath all the glittering normalcy, there was something else tonight, something that made the air feel charged, as though the very atmosphere knew that fate was about to collide with itself in the most spectacular fashion. Verena Lockridge stood at the top of the grand staircase, her gloved hand resting lightly on the banister as she surveyed the scene below, with an expression that revealed nothing of the storm raging in her chest. She had spent exactly 367 days away from this world, 367 days rebuilding herself from the ruins of a scandal that had nearly destroyed her, and now here she stood, returned like a ghost from a past that refused to stay buried. Her gown was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk that seemed to capture the very essence of winter starlight, cut daringly low across her shoulders in a way that would have been unthinkable for the girl she had been a year ago. But that girl was gone, burned away in the fires of humiliation and heartbreak, and in her place stood a woman who had learned that survival required more than tears and prayers. Her dark hair was swept up in an elegant arrangement that left her neck exposed, and around her throat she wore a single strand of pearls that had belonged to her grandmother, the only piece of jewelry she had refused to sell during the darkest months of her exile. She took a breath, feeling the corset restrict her ribs in a way that seemed almost comforting in its familiarity, and began her descent. The first whispers started before she reached the bottom step. She could feel eyes turning toward her like flowers following the sun, could sense the ripple of recognition moving through the crowd as people realized who she was and began the rapid calculations that society demanded. Was she to be acknowledged or cut? Had enough time passed for forgiveness, or was the scandal still too fresh? Verena kept her chin high and her expression serene, though inside she felt like a soldier walking into battle without armor. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, rehearsing in front of mirrors until her smile looked genuine, and her walk conveyed confidence rather than terror. Her aunt, Lady Pemberton, had insisted that she must return to London eventually, that hiding away in the country would only confirm the worst rumors and doom her to a life of exile from everything she had once known. And so Verena had come, armed with nothing but determination and a heart that had learned to beat despite being shattered. She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing footman and moved through the crowd with deliberate grace, nodding to acquaintances who seemed surprised to see her and ignoring those who turned away with theatrical disdain. The ballroom was exactly as she remembered it, from the enormous portrait of the late Earl of Merivale that dominated one wall to the strategic arrangement of potted palms that created intimate corners for clandestine conversations. She had attended dozens of balls in this very room, had danced until her feet ached and laughed until her cheeks hurt, had believed with the foolish certainty of youth that her life would unfold like a fairy tale, with guaranteed happiness at the end. How naive she had been, how blindly trusting in a world that rewarded beauty and breeding but showed no mercy to those who stumbled. Miss Lockridge. Lady Pemberton appeared at her elbow, her angular face set in an expression of determination. The Duchess of Silverton has expressed a desire to speak with you. This is an excellent opportunity. Verena nodded, understanding that her aunt was essentially commanding her to be charming and grateful for any crumbs of acceptance that society deigned to throw her way. She followed Lady Pemberton through the crowd, aware that conversations paused as they passed and then resumed with renewed intensity. The Duchess of Silverton was a formidable woman whose approval could open doors or slam them shut with equal finality, and Verena knew that this interaction would be watched and dissected by everyone present. She curtsied with perfect form when introduced, and endured the Duchess's sharp-eyed examination with composure that cost her more than anyone watching could possibly know. "So you've returned," the Duchess said finally, her voice carrying the weight of judgment. "Your aunt tells me you've been residing in Yorkshire." "Yes, Your Grace. I found the countryside conducive to reflection and recovery." Verena kept her tone neutral, offering neither excuses nor defiance. The Duchess's lips twitched in what might have been approval or amusement. "Reflection is a luxury afforded to those with the strength to face what they see in the mirror. Tell me, Miss Lockridge, have you emerged from your reflection with wisdom or merely bitterness?" It was a test, Verena realized, and a dangerous one. The wrong answer would confirm her as either weak or vindictive, neither of which would serve her return to society. "I've emerged with clarity, Your Grace," she said quietly. "The understanding that one's worth is not determined by a single moment, no matter how catastrophic it may seem." The Duchess studied her for a long moment, before nodding once sharply. "Then perhaps there is hope for you yet. Society is cruel, but not entirely without mercy for those who demonstrate genuine character. We shall see what the season brings." With that pronouncement, she swept away, leaving Verena feeling as though she had just survived the first battle of a very long war. Lady Pemberton squeezed her arm in approval, but before she could speak, a sudden hush fell over the ballroom like a blanket dropped from the ceiling. Conversation stuttered and died, the musicians played their last notes and fell silent, and every head turned toward the main entrance where a figure stood framed in the doorway, like a portrait of aristocratic perfection. Verena felt the blood drain from her face even before she looked, because she knew with a certainty that lived in her bones exactly who had arrived. Damien Hawkesbury, Duke of Ashbourne, entered the ballroom with the kind of presence that made lesser men feel inadequate, and women's hearts raced despite their better judgment. He was dressed in formal black that emphasized his broad shoulders and lean frame, his dark hair perfectly styled, his expression one of carefully controlled indifference that Verena recognized as his armor against a world that constantly demanded his attention. He was beautiful in the way that dangerous things often are, and as he moved through the parting crowd toward the Countess, Verena felt a year's worth of carefully constructed defenses begin to crumble. She had loved this man with the kind of desperate totality that only the young and foolish can achieve. She had believed every word he whispered, had trusted in promises made in moonlit gardens, and stolen moments when the world seemed to exist only for the two of them. She had given him everything, her heart and her innocence and her faith in a future they would share, and he had repaid that gift by destroying her reputation and walking away without a backward glance when the consequences of their secret courtship had been discovered in the worst possible way. The scandal had erupted like a volcano one terrible night when Lady Winterbourne had found Verena leaving the Duke's private study at a house party, her clothing dishevelled and her lips swollen from his kisses. That the Duke had been proposing marriage at that very moment, that Verena had believed herself on the verge of becoming the happiest woman in England, meant nothing when weighed against the appearance of impropriety. Lady Winterbourne had screamed for witnesses, and within hours the story had spread through the house party, and then London like wildfire, embellished with each retelling until Verena found herself painted as a scheming temptress who had tried to trap the Duke into marriage through seduction. And Damien had not defended her. When his formidable mother, the Dowager Duchess, had summoned him and demanded he denounce the relationship to save the family reputation, he had done exactly that. He had stood before Verena in a room full of hostile witnesses and declared that she had pursued him relentlessly, that he had never made promises of marriage, that her claims were the desperate fantasies of a woman with more ambition than sense. She still remembered the look in his eyes as he spoke those words, how they seemed to plead for understanding even as they delivered destruction. She had waited for him to recant, to fight for her, to prove that what they had shared was real and worth defending, but he had simply bowed, offered his insincere regrets for any misunderstanding, and left her to face the consequences alone. Now he stood in the same ballroom where they had first danced together, and Verena found herself unable to look away, despite knowing that every eye in the room was watching to see how this drama would unfold. The Duke completed his greeting with the Countess and turned to survey the assembled guests, his gaze sweeping across the crowd with aristocratic disinterest until suddenly, inexplicably, it stopped. His eyes locked onto hers across the length of the ballroom, and for one suspended moment the world ceased to exist. Verena saw shock flash across his features, quickly followed by something that looked almost like pain before the mask of indifference slammed back into place. But it was too late, because she had seen the truth beneath the facade, had recognized that whatever else he might be, he was not indifferent to her presence. The music began again, breaking the spell, and couples moved onto the dance floor as though nothing momentous had occurred. But Verena knew better, because her hands were shaking and her heart was racing, and she felt like she might shatter into 1,000 pieces if she didn't get out of that room immediately. She murmured an excuse to her aunt and moved quickly toward the terrace doors, desperate for air and escape from the suffocating weight of all those staring eyes. The night air hit her face like a slap, cold and sharp, and exactly what she needed to pull herself back from the edge of panic. The terrace overlooked the Countess's famous gardens, now sleeping under a light dusting of snow that made everything look clean and pristine, as though the earth itself was starting fresh. Verena gripped the stone balustrade and focused on breathing, on feeling the bite of winter air in her lungs and the solid reality of stone beneath her palms. She had survived the last year because she had learned to live with the pain rather than trying to escape it, had accepted that some wounds never fully heal but can be managed. Seeing Damien should not have affected her this way, should not have brought back all the feelings she thought she had buried so carefully. "You shouldn't be out here alone." His voice came from behind her, low and rough in a way she remembered from whispered conversations in darkened corners. "It's not safe." Verena didn't turn around because she couldn't trust herself to maintain composure if she looked at him directly. "I wasn't aware that terraces had become dangerous in my absence, Your Grace. Has London developed a plague of aggressive shrubbery?" She heard him move closer, felt his presence like heat at her back. "You know what I mean. A lady alone in a dark garden is an invitation for gossip, and you of all people should be careful about appearances." The casual cruelty of that statement, the implication that she bore responsibility for her own destruction, snapped something inside her. Verena spun to face him, all the rage and hurt of the past year blazing in her eyes. "How dare you? How dare you stand there and lecture me about reputation when you are the architect of my ruin? You destroyed me with your silence and your cowardice, and now you have the audacity to suggest that I should be more careful." Damien flinched as though she had struck him, and good, she thought savagely, let him hurt even a fraction of what she had endured. Up close he looked older. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, and a hardness to his jaw that spoke of sleepless nights and difficult choices. But he was still devastatingly handsome, still possessed the kind of magnetism that made her body betray her better judgment by wanting to move closer instead of away. "I did what I had to do," he said finally, his voice carefully controlled. "My mother made it clear that if I acknowledged our relationship, she would destroy your family. Your father's financial troubles were not as secret as you believed, Verena. One word from the Dowager Duchess to the right creditors, and your entire family would have been ruined, not just you. I chose the lesser of two evils." The words hit her like physical blows, and she struggled to process what he was saying. Her father's financial problems had been carefully hidden, or so she had thought. But if the Dowager Duchess had known about them, if she had used that knowledge as leverage against Damien, then everything Verena had believed about his betrayal shifted slightly out of focus. But it didn't change the fundamental truth, which was that he had sacrificed her to save himself and his precious family name. "So you threw me to the wolves to save them," she said bitterly. "That's supposed to make me feel better. You're still a coward, Damien. You had a choice and you chose your comfort and position over my honor and happiness. Don't pretend that was noble." His hand shot out and gripped her arm, not painfully but firmly enough that she couldn't pull away, without making a scene that would be visible to anyone who happened to look out the terrace windows. "I chose survival for everyone, instead of destruction for all of us. Do you think I wanted to hurt you? Do you think it didn't destroy me to say those things, to watch you suffer and know I was the cause? I have lived with that guilt every day for the past year, have endured my mother's satisfaction and society's approval while feeling like I was dying inside. Then you should have fought harder, Verena whispered, and was horrified to feel tears threatening. She had sworn she would never cry over this man again, had spent months teaching herself to be strong and independent, and whole without him. You should have chosen me. Something in Damien's expression cracked, the careful control giving way to raw emotion that made him look younger and more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. I did choose you. I chose you by keeping you alive and your family intact. My mother didn't make idle threats, Verena. She would have destroyed everyone you loved without hesitation if I had defied her. At least this way you survived, even if you hate me for it. Before Verena could respond, before she could sort through the tangle of emotions that his confession had unleashed, a voice cut through the night air like a knife. How touching, the Duke explaining away his sins to his former plaything. I do hope we're not interrupting. They both turned to find Lady Celestia Pembroke standing in the terrace doorway, flanked by two other women, whose expressions radiated malicious glee. Lady Celestia was beautiful in a cold, calculating way, and had been one of Verena's closest friends before the scandal. Afterward, she had led the charge in cutting Verena from polite society, and Verena suspected it had less to do with moral outrage and more to do with the fact that Celestia had always wanted Damien for herself. Lady Celestia, Damien said coolly, releasing Verena's arm and stepping back to put proper distance between them. I was merely ensuring that Miss Lockridge was well. The ballroom was quite warm. Oh, I'm sure you were, Celestia purred, moving closer with the grace of a predator. Just as you were ensuring her well-being last year when she was found leaving your study in a state of considerable dishevelment. Tell me, Your Grace, do you make a habit of these charitable endeavours, or is Miss Lockridge special in some way? The insult was clear and calculated, designed to humiliate Verena and remind everyone within earshot of her disgrace. Verena felt her cheeks burn but forced herself to remain calm, to not give Celestia the satisfaction of seeing her wounded. She had learned in her exile that bullies fed on fear and pain, and the only way to defeat them was to refuse to provide either. Lady Celestia, she said with icy politeness, I had forgotten how your mind tends to inhabit the gutter. It must be exhausting to see scandal in every innocent interaction. Perhaps you should return to the ballroom before you catch a chill out here. I understand that winter can be particularly harsh on cold-blooded creatures. One of Celestia's companions gasped, and for a moment Celestia's beautiful face contorted with rage before she managed to smooth it back into a sneer. Clever. I see you've grown claws during your banishment. But wit won't restore your reputation, Miss Lockridge. Nothing can do that. Then it's fortunate I no longer seek society's approval, Verena replied calmly. I've learned that the opinions of small minds are rarely worth the effort of consideration. Before Celestia could respond, the Countess herself appeared on the terrace, her expression thunderous. Lady Celestia, your mother is looking for you. I suggest you attend her immediately, and take your companions with you. It was not a request, and even Celestia knew better than to disobey a direct order from their hostess. She shot one last venomous look at Verena before sweeping back inside, her friends trailing behind her like ducklings following their mother. The Countess turned to Verena and Damien with a stern expression that somehow seemed more amused than angry. You two are causing quite the sensation inside. Half the ballroom is placing bets on whether you'll reconcile or duel with pistols at dawn. I'm not sure which option they're hoping for more enthusiastically. I apologize for the disruption, Lady Merivale, Damien said smoothly. It was not my intention to create a spectacle. Intentions rarely matter where you're concerned, Your Grace, the Countess replied tartly. You have a talent for attracting drama, simply by existing. Miss Lockridge, I suggest you return inside and dance with someone appropriate. Lord Whitfield has been asking after you, and he's far too boring to be involved in scandal, which should suit your current needs perfectly. It was kindly meant, Verena realized, this suggestion that she establish herself as respectable by accepting attention from a reliably dull aristocrat. The Countess was offering her a path back to acceptance, and Verena knew she should be grateful. But the thought of making small talk with Lord Whitfield while Damien watched from across the ballroom felt like torture. Thank you, Lady Merivale, she said quietly. You're very kind. I'm practical, the Countess corrected. Kindness is for those who have the luxury of sentiment. Now go inside before I'm forced to explain to the Duke's mother why her son is lurking on terraces with scandalous young women. The Dowager Duchess frightens me considerably more than any ghost or demon could." Verena nodded and moved toward the door, but Damien's voice stopped her. "Verena?" Just her name, spoken with such weight that she had to look back at him. "I meant what I said. About everything." She held his gaze for a long moment, seeing past the aristocratic mask to the man beneath, the one who had whispered poetry to her in moonlit gardens and promised her forever. "So did I," she said finally. "About everything." Then she walked back into the ballroom, leaving him standing in the cold with the Countess and the ghosts of what they had once been. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced conversations and dances with partners whose names Verena immediately forgot. Lord Whitfield turned out to be exactly as boring as advertised, droning on about sheep breeding with the kind of enthusiasm most men reserved for horses or hounds. She smiled and nodded, and felt Damien's gaze on her like a physical touch, tracking her movements from wherever he stood, making his own obligatory social appearances. She danced with 3 other gentlemen, accepted compliments on her gown from several ladies who seemed cautiously willing to acknowledge her again, and endured her aunt's whispered instructions about maintaining proper behavior. By the time the ball ended, and she finally escaped to her aunt's carriage, she felt exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. "You did well tonight," Lady Pemberton said, as they rattled through the dark London streets. "Better than I expected, truthfully. The Duchess of Silverton's approval will help considerably, and I saw several hostesses who seemed inclined to extend invitations. If you continue to behave with discretion, you may yet salvage something from the wreckage of last year." Verena stared out the window at the passing houses, thinking about how different her life had become from what she had imagined. A year ago, she had believed herself on the verge of becoming a duchess, of living a life filled with love and purpose and meaning. Now she would be grateful for invitations from women who had previously not thought her worthy of notice, and would consider herself fortunate if she managed to attract a husband who didn't hold her past against her too severely. "Did you know," she asked suddenly, not looking at her aunt, "about my father's financial troubles? About the Dowager Duchess using them as leverage?" There was a long silence before Lady Pemberton sighed. "I knew your father had made some unfortunate investments. I did not know the extent of the problem, nor that the Duchess had uncovered it. If I had known, I would have—" She trailed off, and Verena understood that her aunt would not have been able to do anything to prevent the disaster. The Dowager Duchess of Ashbourne wielded power that few could match, and she had never been one to let sentiment interfere with protecting her family's interests. "It doesn't matter now," Verena said quietly. "What's done is done." He thought about Damien's words on the terrace, about his claim that he had sacrificed their relationship to save her family from ruin. Was it possible that she had misjudged him, that his betrayal had been an act of twisted protection rather than pure cowardice? And if so, did that change anything? Or was the result the same regardless of his motivations? She didn't sleep that night, lying awake in her narrow bed in her aunt's townhouse and staring at the ceiling while her mind replayed every moment of the evening. She thought about the way Damien's mask had cracked on the terrace, revealing genuine pain beneath the aristocratic indifference. She thought about Lady Celestia's vicious smile and the Countess's pragmatic kindness. She thought about all the people who had watched her walk through that ballroom, judging and speculating and placing bets on her future, like she was a horse at the races rather than a human being with feelings and dignity. And she thought about the girl she had been a year ago, so innocent and trusting, believing that love conquered all and that good people were rewarded in the end. That girl was gone, burned away in the fires of public humiliation and private heartbreak. In her place was someone harder, someone who understood that the world did not operate on fairy tale principles, and that survival required strength rather than sentiment. She should hate Damien for what he had done, regardless of his reasons. She should close her heart to him completely, and focus on rebuilding her life without the complication of feelings that could only lead to more pain. But when she finally drifted into uneasy sleep as dawn broke over London, her dreams were filled with dark eyes and whispered promises, and she woke with tears on her cheeks, that she pretended were merely the remnants of an emotional evening rather than evidence of a heart that refused to accept its own destruction. The following days brought a flurry of activity as the season properly began. Verena received invitations to several events, each one representing a small step back toward acceptance. She attended a musicale where she was subjected to an interminable performance on the pianoforte by a talentless young lady whose only qualification was a sizable dowry. She endured a garden party where the weather turned unexpectedly cold, and everyone huddled miserably under flapping canvas while pretending to enjoy themselves. She went to the theatre and sat in her aunt's box, painfully aware of the opera glasses trained on her from other boxes as people assessed her appearance and whispered their judgments. And at every event, Damien was there, not approaching her, not speaking to her, but present nonetheless, his gaze finding hers across crowded rooms as though drawn by some invisible cord. She learned to feel when he entered a space even before she saw him, some sixth sense alerting her to his presence in a way that would have been romantic if it weren't so painful. She watched him dance with other women and felt jealousy burn in her chest, despite knowing she had no right to such feelings. She saw Lady Celestia attach herself to his arm at every opportunity and wanted to scream at the injustice of it all. 3 weeks after the Merivale ball, Verena attended a small dinner party at the home of Lady Thornbury, who had decided that Verena's scandal was sufficiently in the past to make her an acceptable guest. The dinner was elegant, but not ostentatious, with only 16 guests seated around a beautifully appointed table laden with crystal and silver and hothouse flowers that must have cost a fortune. Verena found herself seated between an elderly colonel, who smelled of tobacco, and a younger gentleman who seemed more interested in the wine than conversation, which suited her perfectly. She was managing the meal with reasonable composure when Lady Thornbury's butler appeared and murmured something in his mistress's ear that made her eyes widen with alarm. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lady Thornbury said, her voice tight with some emotion Verena couldn't identify. "I'm afraid I must announce some distressing news. Word has just arrived that there has been a fire at the Ashbourne townhouse. The Duke is reported to be injured." The table erupted in gasps and exclamations, but Verena heard nothing except a roaring in her ears as the room seemed to tilt sideways. Without conscious thought, she pushed back from the table and stood, ignoring her aunt's horrified whisper of her name. "Where is he?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Which hospital?" Lady Thornbury looked shocked by her intensity. "I believe he refused to be taken to hospital, insisted on remaining at his residence despite the doctor's recommendations. But Miss Lockridge, surely you don't intend—" Verena was already moving toward the door. Propriety and reputation be damned. She heard her aunt calling after her, but didn't stop, couldn't stop because the thought of Damien injured or worse was more than she could bear. She commandeered Lady Thornbury's carriage with a combination of desperation and determination that left the butler speechless, and gave the coachman directions to the Ashbourne townhouse in Mayfair with such authority that he obeyed without question. The streets passed in a blur as the carriage raced through the night, and Verena's mind conjured increasingly terrible scenarios of what she might find. Fire was a constant terror in London, where so much was built of wood and lit by candles, and warmed by fireplaces that could spark disaster with a single stray ember. She had heard stories of entire families consumed by flames, of houses reduced to ash in a matter of hours, and the thought of Damien caught in such horror made her want to scream. When they arrived at the Ashbourne residence, she saw immediately that the damage was confined to one wing of the massive building. Smoke still rose from broken windows, and servants scurried about with buckets of water, though the fire itself seemed to be extinguished. Verena leaped from the carriage before it fully stopped and ran toward the entrance, where a footman tried unsuccessfully to bar her way. "Miss, you can't go in there, it's not safe. Where is the Duke?" she demanded, and something in her expression must have convinced him not to argue further, because he stepped aside and gestured toward the back of the house. "His study, miss, but the doctor's with him, and Her Grace the Dowager Duchess has given strict orders." Verena ignored him and plunged deeper into the house, following the sound of raised voices to a room at the end of a long corridor. She burst through the door without knocking and found herself in a scene of controlled chaos. Damien sat in a chair with his shirt removed, his left arm and shoulder wrapped in white bandages that were already seeping red. A doctor hovered over him with concerned efficiency, while the Dowager Duchess stood to one side, her face pale but composed as she issued orders to the servants crowding the doorway. "Verena," Damien said, and his voice was hoarse from smoke, but unmistakably surprised. "What are you doing here?" The Dowager Duchess turned and her eyes widened in genuine shock before narrowing to chips of ice. "Miss Lockridge, this is highly inappropriate. I must insist you leave immediately." But Verena barely heard her because she was crossing the room to Damien, her hands reaching for his face before she remembered herself and pulled back. "Are you hurt? The news said injured, but not how badly, and I thought—" She stopped, unable to voice the terrible possibilities that had driven her here. Damien caught her hand in his uninjured one, his grip warm and solid and alive. "I'm fine. The fire started in the library, likely a candle too close to the curtains. I was trying to save some documents when a burning beam fell. The doctor says it looks worse than it is." "That is decidedly not what I said," the doctor interjected dryly. "What I said was that you were fortunate not to be killed, and that you need to rest and avoid aggravating the burns, or you risk infection and worse." The Dowager Duchess moved forward, her expression thunderous. "Miss Lockridge, I don't know what possessed you to come here, but your presence is neither required nor desired. The Duke has sustained an injury and needs rest, not the excitement of an unexpected and thoroughly scandalous visit from a woman with whom he should have no association whatsoever." "Mother," Damien's voice was quiet, but carried unmistakable authority. "Leave us." The Dowager Duchess looked as shocked as if he had slapped her. "I beg your pardon. I said leave us. You too, Doctor. I need to speak with Miss Lockridge privately." "Absolutely not," the Dowager Duchess said sharply. "I will not permit you to create another scandal with this woman. Haven't you learned your lesson about the consequences of inappropriate associations?" Damien stood, swaying slightly before steadying himself, and Verena saw the doctor move instinctively closer in case he fell. "The only lesson I've learned, Mother, is that I was a coward who chose reputation over love and have regretted it every day since. Now please, leave us." The silence that followed was deafening. The Dowager Duchess looked like she wanted to argue further, but something in Damien's expression must have convinced her that he would not be moved. She drew herself up with icy dignity and swept from the room, gesturing for the doctor and servants to follow. The door closed behind them with a decisive click, leaving Verena alone with Damien in a room that still smelled of smoke and fear. "You shouldn't have come," Damien said, but his hand still held hers and his eyes were warm despite the pain she could see etched in the lines around them. "This will cause more gossip." "I don't care," Verena said, and realized with surprise that it was true. "When I heard you were hurt, nothing else mattered. I would have walked through hell itself to make sure you were safe." Something shifted in Damien's expression, the careful control giving way to raw emotion that made him look vulnerable and desperate and heartbreakingly young. "I've been so wrong," he whispered, "about everything. I thought I was protecting you by pushing you away, but all I did was break us both. The past year without you has been torture, Verena. I've gone through the motions of being the perfect duke, attending every obligation, and maintaining every standard my mother demanded, and all the while I felt like I was slowly dying inside." "Then why didn't you fight for me?" The question burst from Verena with all the anguish of a year's worth of unanswered prayers. "If you felt that way, why did you let them destroy me? Why didn't you tell the truth?" Damien's free hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized she'd shed. "Because I was a fool who believed that power and position mattered more than love. My mother convinced me that marrying you would bring ruin to the family, that your father's debts would become ours, and scandal would taint the Hawkesbury name for generations. She painted such a picture of disaster that I convinced myself I was being noble by sacrificing our happiness for the greater good. But the truth is I was just scared. Scared of disappointing her, scared of living up to my father's legacy, scared of choosing my own path instead of the one that had been mapped out for me since birth." "And now?" Verena asked, hardly daring to hope. What's changed? Tonight, when that beam fell and I thought I might die, the only thing I could think about was you. Not my title, not my responsibilities, not my mother's approval. Just you, and all the moments we should have had together, but I threw away like they meant nothing. I realized that I've been living half a life going through the motions without any real purpose or joy, and I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to wake up another morning without you. Don't want to attend another ball and watch you dance with other men. Don't want to spend another year pretending that I don't love you with every fiber of my being. The words washed over Verena like a flood, breaking down the wall she had built so carefully around her heart. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this time would be different, but fear held her back. Your mother will never accept this. She'll do everything in her power to separate us again. Then let her try, Damien said fiercely. I'm done living my life according to her dictates. I'm the Duke now, not her, and it's past time I started acting like it. If she threatens your family again, I'll use my own resources to protect them. If she tries to destroy your reputation further, I'll stand beside you and defend you with everything I have. She doesn't control me anymore, Verena. I won't let her. Verena searched his eyes, looking for any hint of doubt or hesitation, but found only fierce determination and something that looked achingly like hope. You say that now, in the heat of the moment after nearly dying. But what about tomorrow or next week or next month, when the reality of what you're proposing sets in? What happens when society turns its back on you the way it did to me? Can you truly bear that, Damien? Can you walk away from everything you've ever known? He pulled her closer with his good arm, ignoring the sharp intake of breath that suggested the movement caused him pain. I don't care about any of that. Don't you understand? I've spent this entire year trying to convince myself that I made the right choice, that protecting the family name was worth losing you. But it wasn't. Nothing is worth that. I would rather be cast out of society entirely and live in a cottage somewhere with you than spend another day in this gilded prison without you. The declaration should have filled her with joy, should have erased all the hurt and doubt of the past year. But instead, Verena felt a surge of anger that took her by surprise. She pulled back from his embrace, her eyes flashing. How dare you? How dare you say these things to me now after everything I've endured? Do you have any idea what this past year has been like? The whispers, the cut directs, the way people I considered friends crossed the street to avoid speaking to me? I had to rebuild myself from nothing, had to find strength I didn't know I possessed, just to survive each day. And now you expect me to simply forgive everything because you've had an epiphany while recovering from an injury? Damien's face crumpled, and she saw genuine remorse in his expression. No, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm asking for the chance to prove that I've changed, that I'm finally the man you believed I was a year ago. I know I have no right to ask for anything from you, Verena, but I'm asking anyway because the alternative is living the rest of my life knowing I was too much of a coward to even try. The raw honesty in his voice broke something loose inside her, and Verena felt tears streaming down her cheeks unchecked. I hate you, she whispered, but even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. I hate that you still have this power over me. I hate that seeing you hurt made me abandon all sense and propriety to come here. I hate that, despite everything you did, everything you put me through, I never stopped loving you, not for a single day. Verena? He breathed her name like a prayer, and then his mouth was on hers, desperate and demanding and achingly familiar. She knew she should pull away, should maintain the dignity and distance she had worked so hard to cultivate, but instead she found herself kissing him back with a year's worth of longing and heartbreak and hope she had been too afraid to acknowledge. His good arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against him, and she could feel his heart racing beneath her palms where they rested on his bare chest. The kiss deepened, becoming less about passion and more about connection, about two souls recognizing each other after being torn apart. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Verena rested her forehead against his and tried to make sense of the chaos of emotions swirling through her. This doesn't fix everything, she said quietly. One kiss doesn't erase a year of pain. I know, Damien replied, his hand coming up to tangle in her hair. But it's a start. Let me prove myself to you, Verena. Let me show you that I mean every word I've said. I'll court you properly this time, in full view of society and my mother and anyone else who wants to object. I'll make it clear to everyone that you are the woman I intend to marry, and if they don't like it, they can all go to hell." A laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep inside her, surprising them both. "You really have changed. The old Damien would never have suggested defying society so boldly. The old Damien was an idiot who nearly lost the best thing that ever happened to him," he said seriously. "The new Damien has learned that some things are worth fighting for, and you're at the top of that very short list." Before Verena could respond, the door burst open and the Dowager Duchess swept back in, her face a mask of cold fury. "I gave you privacy, Damien, because I believed you would use it to send Miss Lockridge away appropriately. Instead, I returned to find you in an embrace that is entirely inappropriate for an unmarried couple, particularly one with your complicated history. Miss Lockridge, you will leave immediately, and if you have any sense of decency remaining, you will not attempt to contact my son again." Verena felt Damien tense beside her, but before he could speak, she stepped forward to face the Dowager Duchess directly. She had spent a year being cowed by society's judgment and other people's opinions, and she was done with it. "With all due respect, Your Grace, I will leave when I choose to leave, and whether or not I contact the Duke in the future will be determined by him and me, not by you. You may have wielded power over both of us in the past, but those days are over." The Dowager Duchess's eyes widened in shock before narrowing dangerously. "You insolent girl! Do you truly believe you can speak to me in such a manner without consequences? I destroyed you once before, and I can do so again with even greater ease now that you've been foolish enough to come here and compromise yourself further." "Go ahead and try," Verena said calmly, though her heart was racing. "But you'll find that I'm not the naive girl I was a year ago. I've learned to survive without society's approval, which means you have no leverage over me anymore. The worst has already happened, and I'm still standing. What more can you possibly do to me? I can ensure that no respectable family will ever acknowledge you again," the Dowager Duchess hissed. "I can make certain that your father's creditors demand immediate payment on all his debts, forcing your family into bankruptcy. I can spread such rumors about your character that even the most desperate fortune hunter wouldn't consider taking you as a wife. Don't underestimate my reach, girl. I have connections and influence that stretch far beyond what you can possibly imagine. And I have something you don't," Verena replied quietly. "I have your son's love, and I have the strength that comes from having survived your worst already. You can threaten all you want, Your Grace, but I'm not leaving unless Damien asks me to, and something tells me he won't." Damien moved to stand beside Verena, his posture protective despite his injury. "She's right, Mother. I won't ask her to leave, and I won't allow you to threaten her or her family anymore. I'm going to marry Verena with or without your blessing, and if you attempt to interfere, I will cut you off completely from any involvement in my life or the Duchy's affairs. You'll be welcome to remain in the dower house with a generous allowance, but you will have no say in my decisions or my choice of wife." The Dowager Duchess looked as though she had been struck. Her face went pale, then flushed with color as rage and disbelief warred across her features. "You would choose this nobody over your own mother, over the family legacy that your father worked his entire life to build and protect?" "Father worked his life to build a legacy of honor and integrity," Damien said firmly, "and there's no honor in sacrificing the woman I love to maintain appearances. I'm choosing Verena, and I'm choosing the kind of man I want to be rather than the puppet you've been trying to make me. That's my final word on the matter." For a long moment, the Dowager Duchess simply stared at her son, and Verena could see the calculation happening behind her eyes as she weighed her options and realized she was truly losing control. Then, with deliberate precision, she drew herself up and delivered her final blow. "Very well. Marry your little scandal if you must, but don't expect me to attend the wedding or acknowledge her as my daughter-in-law, and don't come crying to me when society turns its back on you both and you realize what you've thrown away for the sake of infatuation." With that, she swept from the room in a rustle of expensive silk, leaving behind a silence that felt heavy with the weight of bridges burned and futures irrevocably altered. Verena felt her knees go weak now that the confrontation was over, and Damien caught her with his good arm, guiding her to sit in the chair he had vacated. "That went well," she said weakly, and was surprised when Damien laughed. "Better than I expected, honestly. She didn't threaten to disinherit me or have us both arrested for moral turpitude, so I'm counting it as a victory." He knelt beside her chair, wincing slightly at the movement, and took her hand in his. "Are you all right? I know that was difficult." Verena looked down at their joined hands and felt something settle inside her, a sense of rightness that she hadn't experienced in over a year. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Your mother is right about one thing. Society will make our lives very difficult if we go through with this. We'll be cut from invitation lists, excluded from events, subjected to gossip and speculation. Your friends will distance themselves, and people we've known our entire lives will treat us like pariahs." "I know," Damien said seriously, "and I won't pretend it will be easy. But Verena, I would rather face all of that with you by my side than spend another day living the half-life I've been enduring. We'll find our own happiness, create our own circle of friends from people who value character over reputation. We'll travel if London becomes too suffocating. Spend time at the country estate where society's rules matter less. We'll build a life together that's genuine and real, rather than the performance I've been giving for the past year." She cupped his face with her free hand, seeing the sincerity in his eyes and feeling the last of her resistance crumble. "You're asking me to take an enormous leap of faith, to trust that this time will be different, that you won't abandon me again when things get difficult." "I know I am," he acknowledged, "and I know I haven't earned that trust yet. But I'm asking you to give me the chance to earn it back, one day at a time, one choice at a time. Let me prove that I'm worthy of your love, Verena. Let me spend the rest of my life making up for the pain I've caused you." The vulnerability in his voice, the absolute honesty of his plea, shattered the last of the walls around her heart. She had spent a year trying to hate him, trying to convince herself that she was better off without him, but the truth was that she had never stopped loving him despite everything. And maybe, just maybe, he deserved the chance to prove that he had truly changed. "All right," she whispered, and saw hope flare in his eyes like a candle in darkness. "I'll give you that chance. But Damien, if you hurt me again, if you choose duty or reputation over me one more time, I'm gone. I won't give you a third opportunity to break my heart. Do you understand?" "Completely," he said, and then he was kissing her again, softer this time, a kiss that felt like a promise and a prayer and the beginning of something new. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers and said quietly, "I'm going to do this properly. Tomorrow I'm going to call on your aunt and formally request permission to court you. Then I'm going to take you driving in Hyde Park at the fashionable hour where everyone can see us together. I'm going to make it abundantly clear to all of London that you are under my protection and that anyone who treats you with disrespect will answer to me." "That will cause an enormous scandal," Verena pointed out, though she couldn't help smiling at his determination. "Good," Damien said firmly. "Let them talk. Let them whisper and speculate and judge. We'll show them that we don't care about their opinions, and eventually they'll move on to the next scandal. But in the meantime, I want everyone to know that you're mine and I'm yours, and that nothing and no one is going to come between us again." The possessiveness in his tone should probably have bothered her, but instead, Verena found it oddly comforting. For so long she had felt adrift and alone, an outsider looking in at a world that had rejected her. The idea of having someone powerful and determined standing beside her, fighting her battles with her instead of abandoning her to face them alone, was intoxicating. "I should go," she said reluctantly, glancing at the door. "Your mother is right about one thing. My being here unchaperoned is terribly improper, and we don't need to give society more ammunition against us than they already have." "Probably wise," Damien agreed, though he made no move to release her hand. "But before you go, I want you to promise me something. Promise me that no matter what happens in the coming weeks, no matter what my mother or Lady Celestia or anyone else tries to do to separate us, you won't run away. You'll come to me, talk to me. Let me fight for us instead of assuming the worst and retreating." It was a fair request, given how their last separation had unfolded largely due to miscommunication and assumptions. Verena nodded slowly. "I promise. But you have to promise me the same thing. No more sacrificing our happiness for some misguided sense of duty or protection. If there's a problem, we face it together. Together, Damien echoed, and sealed the promise with a kiss that left her breathless and dizzy and more hopeful than she had been in a very long time. When Verena finally returned to her aunt's townhouse in the borrowed carriage, she found Lady Pemberton pacing the drawing room in a state of agitation that bordered on panic. "There you are. Do you have any idea what you've done? Running off in the middle of a dinner party to visit an injured man, and not just any man, but the Duke of Ashbourne, the very person whose scandal nearly destroyed you. The gossip is already spreading like wildfire. Lady Thornbury's guests couldn't wait to share the news of your shocking departure, and I've already received 3 notes from concerned friends warning me about your behavior." "I don't care," Verena said calmly, removing her cloak and gloves with steady hands. "The Duke was injured, and I needed to ensure he was well. Nothing else mattered in that moment." Lady Pemberton stared at her as though she had grown a second head. "Have you lost your mind entirely? We've been working for weeks to rehabilitate your reputation, and you've just undone all that progress in a single evening. People will say you're pursuing him shamelessly, that you're trying to trap him into marriage through scandal, just as they accused you of doing last year." "Let them say whatever they want," Verena replied, and felt a strange sense of liberation in the words. "I'm done living my life according to other people's rules and expectations. The Duke has asked to court me properly, and I've accepted. Tomorrow he'll be calling on you formally to request your permission and mine to pay his addresses." Her aunt sank into a chair as though her legs would no longer support her. "He's asked to court you openly, after everything that happened?" "Yes," Verena said simply. "He's changed, Aunt Margaret, or perhaps he's finally found the courage to be the man he always should have been. Either way, he's made it clear that he intends to marry me regardless of what society or his mother thinks about it." Lady Pemberton pressed a hand to her forehead as though warding off a headache. "This is going to be an absolute disaster. The Dowager Duchess will never allow it. She'll use every resource at her disposal to prevent this marriage, and her resources are considerable." "She's already tried," Verena admitted, sitting across from her aunt. "Damien stood up to her tonight, made it clear that he's choosing me over her approval. It wasn't easy, and I know there will be consequences, but I believe he means what he says. He's willing to risk everything for us to be together." Her aunt studied her for a long moment, and Verena saw the calculation happening behind her eyes. Finally, Lady Pemberton sighed deeply. "You love him. Despite everything he did to you, despite all the pain and humiliation, you still love him." It wasn't a question, but Verena answered anyway. "Yes, I wish I didn't, honestly. It would make everything so much simpler if I could just hate him and move on. But I can't seem to stop loving him, no matter how hard I try." "Love is the most inconvenient of all emotions," Lady Pemberton said dryly. "It makes us do foolish things and take risks we know we shouldn't. But I suppose if you're determined to pursue this path, the least I can do is support you. Heaven knows you'll need all the allies you can get in the coming weeks." Verena felt a rush of gratitude toward her aunt, who had already done so much to help her rebuild her life after the scandal. "Thank you. I know this isn't what you wanted for me, but—" "What I wanted was for you to be happy and secure," Lady Pemberton interrupted. "If the Duke truly makes you happy, then I'll do whatever I can to help you achieve that happiness. Though I reserve the right to say I told you so if this all goes horribly wrong." Despite the seriousness of the situation, Verena found herself smiling. Fair enough. True to his word, Damien arrived at Lady Pemberton's townhouse the following afternoon at precisely the fashionable calling hour, when other visitors would be present to witness his arrival. Verena watched from the drawing-room window as his impressive carriage pulled up outside, and felt her heart race with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. This was it, the moment when they would make their intentions public and face whatever consequences followed. He entered the drawing-room with his arm still bandaged, but his bearing confident, and the 2 other ladies who had been making calls immediately fell silent as they recognized him. Verena saw Lady Morrison's eyes widen with shock, and Mrs. Danbury's fan began moving rapidly, as though she needed extra air to cope with the drama unfolding before her. "Lady Pemberton," Damien said, bowing formally to her aunt. "Thank you for receiving me. I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, Your Grace," Lady Pemberton replied, though her tone suggested she was well aware of the spectacle they were creating. "Please do sit down. You know Lady Morrison and Mrs. Danbury, I believe?" The two ladies nodded, clearly torn between the desire to stay and witness what happened next, and the knowledge that proper etiquette demanded they make their excuses and leave. Damien solved their dilemma by acknowledging them briefly, before turning his attention fully to Verena, who had risen from her seat when he entered. "Miss Lockridge," he said, and the warmth in his voice was unmistakable. "You look lovely today. I trust you're well." "Quite well, thank you, Your Grace," Verena replied, playing her part in the formal dance of courtship while hyper-aware of their audience. "I was relieved to hear that your injury is not as serious as initially feared." "Thanks in large part to your concern," he said, and there was no mistaking the meaning in his words. Lady Morrison gasped softly, and Verena knew that by tomorrow morning all of London would know that the Duke of Ashbourne had essentially acknowledged that Verena had visited him the previous evening. Lady Pemberton cleared her throat pointedly. "Your Grace, perhaps you would care for some tea?" "That would be most kind," Damien replied, but his eyes never left Verena's face. "However, before we settle in for tea, I wonder if I might have a word with you privately, Lady Pemberton. There is a matter of some importance I wish to discuss." This was it, Verena realized. He was going to formally request permission to court her, right here and now with witnesses present to spread the news throughout society. It was a bold move, one that would make it impossible for either of them to retreat without causing an even greater scandal. Lady Morrison and Mrs. Danbury were practically vibrating with excitement, and Verena could already imagine the letters they would write and the calls they would make as soon as they left this house. Lady Pemberton rose with admirable composure. "Of course, Your Grace. Ladies, if you'll excuse us for a moment. Verena, perhaps you could show Lady Morrison that book of poetry she was asking about earlier." It was a transparent excuse to separate Verena from the Duke while he spoke with her aunt, but it served the purpose of maintaining propriety while still allowing their audience to witness the general outline of what was happening. Verena led the two ladies toward the bookshelves on the far side of the room, painfully aware of their avid attention, as they pretended to be interested in literature while clearly straining to overhear the conversation happening near the fireplace. She couldn't make out the words, but she could see Damien speaking earnestly to her aunt, could see Lady Pemberton's expression shifting from resignation to something that might have been cautious approval. The conversation lasted perhaps 5 minutes, though it felt like an eternity. And then her aunt was nodding and Damien was bowing, and they were both turning to look at Verena with expressions that made her heart soar. "Miss Lockridge," Lady Pemberton said formally, "His Grace has requested permission to pay his addresses to you, and I have granted that permission contingent upon your own feelings in the matter. Do you wish to receive the Duke's attentions?" Every eye in the room was on her, and Verena knew that this moment would define everything that came after. If she said no, she would save herself from potential future heartbreak, but would always wonder what might have been. If she said yes, she was choosing a path that would be difficult and fraught with obstacles, but one that offered the possibility of genuine happiness. "Yes," she said clearly, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside her. "I would be honored to receive His Grace's attentions." The smile that broke across Damien's face was worth every moment of uncertainty and fear. He crossed the room to her side, taking her hand in his and raising it to his lips in a gesture that was both formally proper and intimately possessive. "Then, with your aunt's permission and your consent, I would very much like to take you driving in Hyde Park this afternoon. The weather is fine, and I believe the fresh air would do us both good." Everyone in the room understood what he was really saying, that he intended to parade their courtship through the most public venue in London, making it impossible for anyone to pretend they didn't know about his intentions. It was a declaration of war against propriety and his mother's machinations, and Verena loved him all the more for his boldness. "I would like that very much," she said, squeezing his hand gently. Lady Morrison and Mrs. Danbury made their excuses shortly after, clearly eager to spread the news of what they had witnessed. As soon as they were gone, Lady Pemberton sank into her chair and regarded Damien with a mixture of exasperation and grudging respect. "You certainly don't do anything by halves, do you, Your Grace? By tomorrow, every drawing room in London will be buzzing with news of your courtship. I hope you're prepared for the consequences." "I am," Damien said firmly, "and I want everyone to know exactly where I stand. Miss Lockridge's reputation suffered because of my cowardice last year. The least I can do now is make it absolutely clear that she has my full support and protection." "The Dowager Duchess will be furious," Lady Pemberton pointed out. "My mother's feelings are no longer my primary concern," Damien replied. "Verena's happiness is." An hour later, Verena found herself seated beside Damien in his elegant open carriage as they made their way toward Hyde Park. She was acutely aware of the stares they attracted as they passed through the streets, could see curtains twitching in windows as people peered out to confirm the unlikely sight of the Duke of Ashbourne driving through London with the scandal-tainted Miss Lockridge beside him. "Having second thoughts?" Damien asked quietly, noticing her tension. "About 100 of them," Verena admitted. "But I'm not backing out if that's what you're worried about. I just wish people would stop staring quite so obviously." "They'll have plenty more to stare at when we reach the park," Damien said with grim humour. "The fashionable hour is when everyone goes to see and be seen. We'll be providing the entertainment for the entire ton this afternoon." He wasn't wrong. When they entered Hyde Park, Verena saw heads turning all along Rotten Row, the popular riding path where London's elite came to parade their finest horses and newest fashions. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as people caught sight of them, and Verena could practically feel the weight of judgment and speculation pressing down on her shoulders. But Damien seemed utterly unbothered, guiding his horses with easy confidence, while nodding to acquaintances as though this were the most natural thing in the world. "Your Grace," a voice called out, and Verena turned to see Lady Celestia riding toward them on a magnificent bay mare, her expression a careful mask of surprise that didn't quite hide the fury in her eyes. "What an unexpected pleasure. And Miss Lockridge, how interesting to see you here." "Lady Celestia," Damien replied coolly. "Yes, Miss Lockridge has agreed to accompany me on a drive. The weather is exceptionally fine today, don't you think?" "Indeed," Celestia said through gritted teeth, her gaze moving between them as though trying to decipher exactly what was happening. "I had thought Miss Lockridge was still residing quietly in the country. Her return to London society has been quite sudden." "Not at all," Verena said smoothly, finding strength in Damien's solid presence beside her. "I've been back for several weeks now. Perhaps you simply failed to notice at the various events we've both attended." The barb hit home, and Celestia's pleasant mask slipped for just a moment before she recovered. "How careless of me. Well, I'm sure we'll be seeing much more of each other now that you've re-emerged. Do enjoy your drive." With that barely veiled threat, she urged her horse forward and disappeared into the crowd of riders. "That went about as well as expected," Damien observed. "Celestia won't let this go easily. She's had her sights set on becoming a duchess for years, and she won't appreciate being supplanted by you." "I'm not afraid of Lady Celestia," Verena said, though her hands were trembling slightly in her lap. "I've survived worse than her malicious gossip." Damien reached over and covered her hand with his, a gesture that was entirely too intimate for such a public setting, but which Verena appreciated nonetheless. "You won't have to survive alone this time. Whatever she tries, whatever anyone tries, we'll face it together." They completed 2 more circuits of the park, enduring stares and whispers and the occasional brave soul who approached to offer congratulations that sounded more like condolences. By the time they finally left, Verena felt exhausted from maintaining her composure, but also strangely exhilarated. They had done it, made their courtship public in the most dramatic way possible, and survived the immediate fallout. The following days brought a deluge of reactions. Some were surprisingly positive. Several ladies who had shown Verena kindness during her return to London sent notes expressing their support and invitations to small gatherings where she and Damien would be welcome. But there were also plenty of negative responses. 3 hostesses who had previously invited Verena to upcoming events sent apologetic notes withdrawing their invitations, clearly not wanting to risk the Dowager Duchess's displeasure by hosting her son's controversial courtship. The gossip columns in the newspapers had a field day, with thinly veiled references to a certain duke's questionable romantic choices and the return of a scandal that shocked the ton last season. But through it all, Damien remained steadfast. He called on Verena every afternoon at the proper time, took her driving regularly, attended the few social events where they were both welcome, and made it clear to anyone who would listen that his intentions were serious and honorable. Slowly, gradually, the initial shock began to fade, and people started to accept that the Duke of Ashbourne was truly courting Miss Lockridge despite all the obstacles. The real test came 3 weeks into their courtship when they were invited to a ball at the home of the Duke and Duchess of Ravenswood, one of the most important social events of the season. Verena knew that their attendance would be scrutinized by everyone present, that their every interaction would be watched and judged and discussed. She dressed with extra care that evening, choosing a gown of deep emerald silk that brought out the color of her eyes and made her feel confident and beautiful. When Damien arrived to escort her, the approval in his eyes made all the effort worthwhile. "You look absolutely stunning," he said quietly, helping her with her wrap. "Every man in that ballroom is going to envy me tonight." "Let's hope that translates into some measure of social acceptance," Verena replied nervously. "I know the Ravenswoods are friends of your family. Will your mother be there?" "Probably," Damien admitted. "But she won't make a scene. The Duchess of Ravenswood is one of the few people my mother respects enough to behave appropriately around, even when she's furious." The Ravenswood ballroom was magnificent, with soaring ceilings painted with classical frescoes and chandeliers that sparkled like captured starlight. As they entered, Verena felt the now familiar sensation of conversations pausing and eyes turning toward them. But this time, instead of feeling like prey before predators, she held her head high and walked in on Damien's arm with confidence that was only partly feigned. The Duke of Ravenswood greeted them warmly, though his wife's welcome was more reserved. Verena understood that the Duchess was being cautious, not wanting to fully embrace someone who might still prove to be socially toxic, but willing to extend conditional hospitality out of respect for Damien's position. It was more than Verena had dared hope for, and she accepted it gracefully. They had barely moved into the ballroom when the Dowager Duchess appeared, resplendent in silver silk and diamonds, her expression one of icy disapproval. "Damien," she said coolly, ignoring Verena completely, "I had hoped you would reconsider this association. Apparently I was overly optimistic." "Mother," Damien replied evenly. "You know Miss Lockridge, of course." "Verena, you remember my mother, the Dowager Duchess of Ashbourne." It was a deliberate move, forcing his mother to acknowledge Verena or commit the social solecism of being openly rude at a prominent ball. The Dowager Duchess's jaw tightened, but she managed a barely perceptible nod in Verena's direction before turning her attention back to her son. "We need to speak privately," she said, in a tone that brooked no argument. "I'm afraid that's not possible at the moment," Damien replied pleasantly. "I've promised Miss Lockridge the first waltz, and I won't break that promise. Perhaps later in the evening we can find time to talk." The Dowager Duchess's eyes flashed with anger, but she was too well-bred to cause a scene in such a public venue. "Very well, later then. But we will speak, Damien. There are matters that must be addressed." With that ominous pronouncement, she swept away, leaving a wake of whispered speculation. "That was tense," Verena said quietly, as Damien led her toward the dance floor. "It could have been worse," he replied. "At least she didn't throw wine in anyone's face or challenge us to a duel." The absurdity of the image made Verena laugh, and she felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. When the music began and Damien swept her into the waltz, she allowed herself to simply enjoy the moment. The feel of his hand at her waist, the way they moved together as though they'd been dancing their entire lives, the knowledge that despite everything, they were together and fighting for their future. "Happy?" Damien asked softly as they turned across the floor. "Surprisingly, yes," Verena admitted. "Terrified and anxious, and worried about what comes next, but also happy. Is that strange?" "Not at all," he said, his eyes warm as they gazed into hers. "I feel exactly the same way. It's like standing on the edge of a cliff, terrifying, but also exhilarating, because we're finally taking control of our own lives." The waltz ended too soon, and they were immediately surrounded by other guests wanting to engage them in conversation. Some were genuinely warm and welcoming, while others were clearly fishing for gossip to share later. Verena navigated it all with as much grace as she could muster, grateful for Damien's steady presence beside her. It was later in the evening, when Verena had stepped away to the ladies' retiring room, that she encountered Lady Celestia again. The other woman was standing by the mirror, adjusting her hair with studied casualness, but Verena wasn't fooled. This meeting was no accident. "Miss Lockridge," Celestia said sweetly, turning to face her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "How lovely you look tonight. The Duke certainly seems smitten. It must be gratifying to have recaptured his attention after last year's unpleasantness." "I'm not interested in playing games with you, Celestia," Verena said tiredly. "If you have something to say, just say it directly." Celestia's smile sharpened. "Very well. I'll be direct. You're deluding yourself if you think this courtship will end in marriage. The Duke may be infatuated now, may even believe he wants to marry you, but when it comes time to actually make that commitment, to stand before his peers and society and declare you his Duchess, he'll falter. He did it once before, and he'll do it again. Men like Damien Hawkesbury don't marry women like you. They marry women like me, women with impeccable reputations and family connections that enhance rather than tarnish their position." The words struck deep, because they echoed Verena's own secret fears, the doubts that kept her awake at night despite Damien's reassurances. But she had learned during her year of exile that showing vulnerability to predators like Celestia was a mistake. So instead of flinching, she stepped closer and met the other woman's gaze directly. "You know what the difference is between you and me, Celestia. I don't need to marry a duke to have value and worth. I've learned to stand on my own, to find strength in myself rather than in a man's title or society's approval. You, on the other hand, have built your entire identity around landing the right husband, and you're terrified because you can see that slipping away. The Duke doesn't want you, he never did. And all the scheming and malicious gossip in the world won't change that fundamental truth." Celestia's face flushed with rage, and for a moment Verena thought she might actually strike her. But then another woman entered the retiring room, and Celestia was forced to compose herself. "We'll see," she hissed quietly. "We'll see who's standing beside the Duke when this is all over." Then she swept from the room, leaving Verena alone with her racing heart and shaking hands. When Verena returned to the ballroom, she found Damien waiting for her with a concerned expression. "Are you all right? You look pale." "I'm fine," she assured him, though she wasn't entirely certain that was true. "Just a minor confrontation with Lady Celestia. Nothing I couldn't handle." Damien's jaw tightened. "What did she say to you?" "Nothing that matters," Verena replied, not wanting to repeat Celestia's poisonous words. "She's just trying to shake my confidence, but it didn't work." He studied her face for a long moment before nodding slowly. "If she bothers you again, I want you to tell me. I won't have her or anyone else making you uncomfortable." They stayed at the ball for another hour, fulfilling their social obligations and demonstrating to everyone present that they were a united front. By the time they finally left, Verena was exhausted, but also feeling cautiously optimistic. They had survived another test, had shown society that they weren't going to be intimidated or driven apart by gossip and disapproval. The carriage ride back to Lady Pemberton's townhouse was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived, Damien helped her down and walked her to the door, his hand warm and solid around hers. "Thank you for tonight," he said quietly, "for standing beside me despite how difficult I know it is. I don't tell you often enough how much I admire your courage and strength." Verena felt tears prick her eyes at the sincerity in his voice. "Thank you for giving me something worth being courageous for. A year ago I thought my life was over. Now I'm starting to believe that maybe it's just beginning." He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her gently, a kiss that spoke of promise and commitment and a future they were building together one difficult day at a time. When he pulled back, his eyes were shining with emotion. "I love you, Verena Lockridge. I should have said it a year ago, should have shouted it from the rooftops instead of hiding behind my mother's demands and society's expectations. But I'm saying it now, and I'll keep saying it every day for the rest of our lives if you'll let me. "I love you too," she whispered back, and felt something settle inside her, a sense of peace she hadn't experienced since before everything fell apart. "Despite all the reasons I shouldn't, despite everything that's happened and everything that might still go wrong, I love you." They stood there on her aunt's doorstep for a long moment, neither wanting to break the spell, until finally the door opened and Lady Pemberton appeared with a knowing expression. "I hate to interrupt what is clearly a romantic moment, but you're creating quite a spectacle for the neighbours, and we've had enough scandal for one season. Miss Lockridge, inside please. Your Grace, good evening." Damien laughed and bowed formally. "Good evening, Lady Pemberton. I'll call tomorrow afternoon if that's acceptable." "I suppose I couldn't stop you if I tried," Lady Pemberton replied dryly. "Very well, tomorrow afternoon, but at a respectable hour, if you please." As Verena followed her aunt inside, she glanced back to see Damien standing by his carriage, watching her with an expression that made her heart soar. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever obstacles they would have to overcome, she knew with absolute certainty that they would face them together. The next few weeks passed in a blur of courtship activities and social navigation. Damien was true to his word, calling on Verena regularly and ensuring that their relationship was conducted with complete propriety, despite the unconventional circumstances. They attended balls and musicales together, went driving in the park, and slowly began to build a circle of friends who either didn't care about the scandal or were willing to overlook it in favor of genuine friendship. But not everything went smoothly. The Dowager Duchess continued her campaign of subtle interference, using her considerable influence to make their lives difficult wherever possible. Several promising social connections mysteriously cooled after private conversations with her. Invitations that had been extended were quietly withdrawn. And the gossip, while less intense than it had been initially, never completely died away. It was during a particularly difficult week, when 3 separate hostesses had declined to invite them to upcoming events, that Damien arrived at Lady Pemberton's townhouse with an expression of determined purpose that Verena had learned to recognize. "I need to speak with you," he said without preamble once they were alone in the drawing room. "I've been thinking about our situation, about the obstacles we continue to face, and I've come to a decision." Verena felt her heart sink, certain that this was the moment Celestia had predicted, when Damien would realize that the cost of marrying her was too high and would find some gentle way to withdraw. She steeled herself for the blow, determined not to fall apart in front of him. "I think we should elope," Damien said, and it took a moment for the words to register because they were so completely different from what she'd been expecting. "What?" she said stupidly. "I think we should elope," he repeated, taking her hands in his. "Go to Scotland, get married at Gretna Green and present everyone with a fait accompli. My mother can't prevent a marriage that's already happened, and society will eventually accept it because they'll have no choice. We've been trying to do this the proper way to gain acceptance and approval before taking the final step. But I'm beginning to think that's backwards. Once we're married, once you're the Duchess of Ashbourne, people will have to acknowledge you regardless of how they feel about the circumstances." Verena's mind reeled at the suggestion. Elopement was scandalous, the sort of thing done by desperate couples with no other options. But it was also practical in a way that appealed to her. They could avoid months more of social maneuvering and her fear that Damien might change his mind. On the other hand, it would rob them of a proper wedding and would likely enrage the Dowager Duchess beyond all reconciliation. "Are you certain?" she asked carefully. "Because once we do this, there's no going back. Your mother will never forgive you, and we'll be burning a lot of bridges with society." "I'm certain," Damien said firmly. "I'm tired of waiting for other people's approval, tired of letting my mother and the gossips dictate our lives. I want to marry you, Verena. Not someday in the distant future after we've jumped through enough hoops to satisfy everyone else, but now, as soon as possible. Will you elope with me?" It was madness. It was impulsive and reckless, and exactly the kind of scandal that had destroyed her reputation in the first place. But looking into Damien's eyes, seeing the absolute certainty and love shining there, Verena found herself nodding. "Yes," she said, and felt a wild surge of excitement chase away her anxiety. "Yes, let's do it. Let's elope and get married and start our lives together, without waiting for permission from people who will never fully accept us anyway." Damien's face broke into a brilliant smile, and he pulled her into his arms, spinning her around in a circle that made her laugh breathlessly. "We'll leave tomorrow night," he said, setting her back on her feet. "I'll arrange everything, the carriage, the route, accommodation along the way. Can you be ready?" "I'll be ready," Verena promised, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. "Should we tell my aunt?" "Not until we're gone," Damien said practically. "She'll try to talk us out of it, and the fewer people who know our plans, the less chance there is of my mother finding out and trying to stop us. We'll leave her a letter explaining everything." They spent the next day in a state of barely contained excitement mixed with anxiety. Verena packed a small trunk with essential items, trying to choose what to take without making it obvious to the servants that she was preparing for a journey. She wrote a letter to Lady Pemberton explaining her decision and expressing gratitude for everything her aunt had done, and she tried not to think too hard about all the ways this plan could go wrong. That evening, as the sun set over London, Damien's carriage pulled up outside the townhouse at precisely the appointed time. Verena slipped out through the servants' entrance, her heart pounding as she hurried to where he waited. The moment she was inside the carriage, they were off, racing through the darkening streets toward the North Road and Scotland beyond. "No regrets?" Damien asked as London fell away behind them. "Hundreds," Verena admitted with a slightly hysterical laugh, "but no desire to turn back." He pulled her close against his side, and they rode through the night wrapped in each other's arms, and the knowledge that they were finally taking control of their own destiny. The journey to Scotland took 3 days of hard travel, stopping only briefly at coaching inns for rest and fresh horses. Verena was exhausted and disheveled by the time they finally arrived at Gretna Green, but also more certain than ever that this was the right choice. The marriage ceremony itself was simple, performed by the local blacksmith, who served as the village's irregular marriage officiant. There were no flowers, no elegant guests, no grand celebration, just 2 people speaking vows to each other in a small workshop that smelled of coal and hot metal. But when the blacksmith pronounced them married, and Damien kissed her for the first time as her husband, Verena felt more joy than she had ever experienced at any of the elaborate society weddings she had attended. "Hello, Duchess," Damien murmured against her lips, and she laughed through happy tears. "Hello, husband." They spent their wedding night at a small but comfortable inn, finally alone together without the weight of society's judgment or the fear of being discovered. Damien was gentle and patient, understanding that despite everything they had been through, this was new territory for both of them. And when Verena woke the next morning wrapped in her husband's arms, watching sunlight stream through the window of their modest room, she felt a contentment she had thought lost forever. "We should probably send word to London," she said reluctantly, "before someone raises a hue and cry about our disappearance." "Already done," Damien replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I sent a messenger last night while you were sleeping. By now my mother and your aunt both know that we're married. I imagine the reactions are dramatic." That was putting it mildly, as they discovered when they finally returned to London a week later. The Dowager Duchess had apparently gone into seclusion at the Dower House, refusing to speak to anyone about her son's scandalous elopement. Lady Pemberton was torn between relief that Verena had secured such an advantageous match and fury at having been deceived about their plans. And society was, predictably, ablaze with gossip about the Duke who had thrown propriety to the winds and married his scandal-tainted love at Gretna Green. But the one thing no one could dispute was that Verena was now the Duchess of Ashbourne, with all the rights and privileges that title entailed. Women who had cut her just weeks before now had to acknowledge her or risk insulting one of the most powerful dukes in England. Invitations that had been withdrawn were hastily re-extended, and slowly, grudgingly, society began to accept what had happened. The first real test came at the Duchess of Silverton's annual autumn ball, one of the most prestigious events of the season. Verena dressed with extra care for the occasion, choosing a gown of midnight blue silk that complemented her new diamonds, a wedding gift from Damien that had belonged to his grandmother rather than his mother. As they prepared to leave, she caught sight of herself in the mirror and barely recognized the confident woman staring back at her. "Nervous?" Damien asked, coming to stand behind her and placing his hands on her shoulders. "Terrified," she admitted. "This will be the first time I appear in society as your Duchess. Everyone will be watching to see if I measure up." "You'll more than measure up," he said firmly, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "You're stronger, smarter, and more compassionate than half the women in that ballroom combined. And you're my wife, which means you have every right to hold your head high and expect to be treated with the respect your position deserves." His confidence bolstered her own, and when they entered the Duchess of Silverton's ballroom an hour later, Verena found the strength to walk in with her head high and her hand resting confidently on her husband's arm. The Duchess greeted them warmly, clearly pleased to have such a notable couple at her ball, and that approval seemed to signal to the rest of society that it was acceptable to acknowledge the new Duchess of Ashbourne. Lady Celestia was there, of course, looking beautiful and bitter in equal measure. She watched from across the ballroom as Damien led Verena in the opening waltz, and Verena could see the defeat in her eyes. It should have felt triumphant, but instead, Verena just felt sad for the other woman, trapped in her own jealousy and unable to find happiness beyond comparing herself to others. The evening progressed smoothly, with Verena navigating conversations and social obligations with growing confidence. She danced with several gentlemen who seemed genuinely pleased to make her acquaintance, received compliments from ladies who were clearly reassessing their earlier judgments, and slowly began to feel like maybe, just maybe, she had finally found her place in this complicated world. It was near the end of the evening when an unexpected guest arrived, the Dowager Duchess of Ashbourne, making her first public appearance since the elopement. The ballroom fell silent as she entered, everyone watching to see how she would react to her new daughter-in-law. Verena felt Damien tense beside her, and she squeezed his hand reassuringly. The Dowager Duchess approached them with measured steps, her face an unreadable mask. When she reached them, she studied Verena for a long moment before speaking. "Duchess," she said formally, and the use of the title was significant, an acknowledgement of Verena's position and legitimacy. "I trust you're enjoying the evening?" "Very much, Your Grace," Verena replied carefully. "It's kind of you to inquire." Another long pause, and then the Dowager Duchess did something completely unexpected. She inclined her head in a small but unmistakable gesture of respect. "My son has made his choice, and I must accept it. I hope you will prove worthy of the position you now hold." It wasn't warm, wasn't anything close to acceptance or approval, but it was also not outright hostility. It was, Verena realized, as much as the proud woman was capable of offering, a truce if not peace. "I will do my utmost to honor the Ashbourne name and legacy," Verena said sincerely, "and I hope that in time we might find a way to move forward together as family." The Dowager Duchess's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Perhaps," she said quietly, "time will tell." Then she moved away to greet other guests, leaving Verena and Damien staring after her in stunned surprise. "Did that just happen?" Damien asked incredulously. "Did my mother just essentially give us her blessing?" "I think she just accepted that she can't change what's already done," Verena said more cautiously. "It's not the same as approval, but it's better than active opposition. So I'll take it." The rest of the evening felt lighter somehow, as though a weight had been lifted from both their shoulders. They danced and laughed and enjoyed themselves in a way they hadn't been able to before, finally free from the constant tension of wondering when the next attack or obstacle would appear. In the months that followed, Verena settled into her role as Duchess with surprising ease. She discovered that she had a talent for managing the household and estate affairs, and Damien was happy to share those responsibilities with her, rather than expecting her to be merely decorative. They divided their time between London and the country estate, finding joy in the quieter moments away from society's constant scrutiny. The Dowager Duchess gradually thawed in her attitude toward Verena, though their relationship never became truly warm. But they learned to coexist civilly, and eventually even developed a grudging mutual respect. Lady Celestia faded from their social circle, eventually marrying a wealthy earl who seemed more interested in her connections than her personality. A year after their elopement, Verena stood in the nursery of Ashbourne Hall, gazing down at the tiny daughter sleeping peacefully in her cradle. The baby had her father's dark hair and her mother's delicate features, and looking at her, Verena felt a surge of love so powerful it almost hurt. "She's perfect," Damien said softly from the doorway. coming to stand beside his wife and wrap an arm around her waist. Just like her mother. She's going to grow up in a different world than we did, Verena said thoughtfully. We'll make sure of it. She'll never doubt that she's loved for who she is, rather than what society expects her to be. She'll know that her worth isn't determined by her ability to make a good match or maintain a spotless reputation. She'll be strong and brave like you, Damien agreed, pressing a kiss to Verena's temple. And she'll know that love is worth fighting for, even when the whole world seems set against you. Verena leaned back against her husband, feeling grateful for the long, difficult journey that had brought them to this moment. The scandal that had nearly destroyed her had ultimately led to something better than she could have imagined, a partnership built on genuine love and mutual respect rather than societal obligation. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Everything you gave up to be with me? The easy path you could have taken if you'd married someone else?" Damien turned her in his arms so he could look into her eyes. "Not for a single second. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Verena. Every obstacle we faced, every difficulty we overcame was worth it to end up here with you and our daughter. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." She kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture, and felt his arms tighten around her. Their daughter stirred in her cradle, making soft baby sounds, and they broke apart with matching smiles. "We should let her sleep," Damien whispered. "Come, let's go downstairs. Your aunt is arriving for dinner tonight, and you know how she likes everything to be perfect." As they left the nursery hand in hand, Verena reflected on how much had changed in the 2 years since that fateful winter ball, when she had returned to London broken and uncertain. She had learned that true strength came from within, rather than from society's approval. She had discovered that love required courage and the willingness to fight for what mattered most. And she had found that sometimes the most devastating setbacks could become opportunities for growth and transformation. The road had been difficult, filled with obstacles and heartbreak, and moments when giving up seemed like the easier choice. But she had persevered, had found the strength to demand the love and respect she deserved, and had built a life that was richer and more meaningful than the fairy tale she had once imagined. And that, Verena thought as she walked through her home beside the man who had learned to be worthy of her love, was worth every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt and fear. Because true love wasn't the effortless romance of fairy tales, it was the choice to keep fighting, keep growing, keep building something real and lasting, even when the world tried to tear it apart. A message from our hearts to yours. My dearest readers, beautiful souls who have journeyed with Verena through darkness into light, this message is for you, and it comes wrapped in all the love and care we hold for each person who finds themselves in these pages. If Verena's story has resonated with you, if you've felt echoes of your own struggles in her pain or your own hopes in her triumph, then please hear this truth. You are worthy of a love that chooses you, again and again, especially when choosing you is difficult. Your value doesn't diminish because someone failed to recognize it. Like Verena, you carry within you a strength that may have been hidden, but has never truly left. Perhaps you've experienced your own betrayal, your own moment when someone you trusted walked away when you needed them most. Perhaps you've rebuilt yourself in the quiet corners of your life, piece by painful piece, wondering if you'll ever feel whole again. If so, know this. You are not broken, you are becoming. Never ever settle for love that makes you feel like you must earn it through perfect behavior or by making yourself smaller. Never accept someone who promises forever, but disappears when forever becomes complicated. True love, the kind that nourishes your soul rather than depleting it, will stand in the storm with you, will fight for you when fighting is required, will choose you over comfort and convenience. You are enough. Read that again. You are enough. Exactly as you are in this moment, with all your perceived flaws and past mistakes and uncertainty about the future. Your history doesn't write your destiny. Your heartbreaks don't define your capacity for joy. And you absolutely have the power to write a new chapter, to demand the respect and devotion you deserve, to build a life that honors your authentic, magnificent self. Like Verena, you may need to walk through fire to reach your happiness. You may need to stand alone before you can stand beside someone worthy of you. You may need to lose everything you thought mattered to discover what truly does. But you have survived everything life has thrown at you so far, which means you are far stronger than you know. Be brave enough to believe you deserve better. Be strong enough to walk away from what diminishes you. Be wise enough to recognize love that elevates and empowers you. And be patient enough with yourself to heal at your own pace, in your own way, without rushing to meet anyone else's timeline. Your love story is still being written, beautiful soul, and you are both the author and the heroine. Make it magnificent, make it true, make it yours. With all our love and belief in you, your storytellers who see your worth even when you struggle to see it yourself. Now, dear ones, we have something wonderful to share with you. If this story has touched your heart, warmed your soul, or given you hope, we would be so grateful if you could help us share these messages of love and empowerment with others who need to hear them. Our channel is filled with more stories like Verina's, tales of resilient women who find their strength, transformative love that's worth fighting for, and journeys from heartbreak to healing. We pour our hearts into every story, crafting each word with care because we know how much these narratives can mean to someone who needs them. If Verena and Damien's journey touched you, please like this video. It helps other readers discover these stories exactly when they need them most. Leave a comment and share your thoughts with us. Did Damien truly deserve his second chance? Which moment made you hold your breath? Did you recognize a part of yourself in Verena's strength? We read every single message and treasure each one. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss another love story. We release new tales regularly, each one crafted with the same care and emotion as this one. Turn on notifications to be among the first to explore our newest releases. You won't want to wait for what comes next. We've built a treasure trove for you, sweeping historical romances that transport you to grand ballrooms and distant estates, contemporary stories that mirror real challenges, tales of redemption, passion, triumph, and love that changes everything. Each story carries a message of empowerment, self-worth, and the courage to demand more from life and love. Join our community of romance lovers who support one another, celebrate love in all its forms, and believe that every woman deserves her own powerful love story. Together, we're building something special, an intimate space where stories heal, inspire, and remind us of our own strength. Thank you truly for spending this time with Verena, Damien, and with us. Your presence here means more than you know, and we cannot wait to share more stories that speak to your heart. Until our next story, stay strong, stay hopeful, and never forget your worth. We'll see you very soon in another unforgettable tale, Echoes of Romance.